we were talking about the relative evolutionary roles of men and women. This is speculative, obviously. And because our research did indicate, it's tentative research so far, that the SJW sort of equality above all else philosophy is more prevalent among women. It's predicted by the personality factors that are more common among women. So agreeableness and high negative emotion. Primarily agreeableness. But in addition, it's also predicted by being female. And so I've been thinking about that a lot because, well, men are bailing out of the humanities like mad. And pretty much out of the universities except for STEM. The women are moving in like mad. And they're also moving into the political sphere like mad. And this is new, right? We've never had this happen before, and we do not know what the significance of it is. It's only 50 years old. And so we were thinking about this. And so I don't know what you think about this proposition, but imagine that historically speaking, it's something like women were responsible for distribution and men were responsible for production. Something like that. And maybe that's only the case really in the tight confines of the immediate family, but that doesn't matter because that's most of the evolutionary landscape for human beings anyways. What the women did was make sure that everybody got enough. Okay, and that seems to me to be one of the things that's driving, at least in part, the SJW demand for equity and equality. It's like, let's make sure everybody has enough. It's like, well, look, fair enough, you know, I mean, you can't argue with that. But there's an antipathy between that and the reality of differential productivity, you know, because people really do differ in their productivity. I think that the SJW phenomena is different, and I think it is associated, at least in part, with the rise of women to political power. And we don't know what women are like when they have political power, because they've never had it. I mean, there's been queens, obviously, and that sort of thing. There's been female authority figures, and females have wielded far more power historically than feminists generally like to admit. But this is a different thing. And we don't know what a truly female political philosophy would be like. But it might be, especially if it's not been well examined and it isn't very sophisticated conceptually. It could easily be, well, let's make sure things are distributed equally. Well, yeah, but sorry, that's just not going to fly.
One of Peterson's main influences is the psychologist Carl Jung. Jung's psychology was built around the concept of the shadow. All the things about ourselves we don't want to accept. Our anger, negativity, unconscious judgments, and how we need to integrate all those disowned parts to grow. I'm convinced that's what's happening on a vast cultural level. Since leaving Channel 4 News, I've retrained as a counsellor and started leading personal growth workshops for men, and thought a lot about how these unconscious gender dynamics are playing out in the culture. One of the central concepts is Jung's idea of animus and anima possession, how we each have both an inner masculine and feminine essence. In a man, when he's unconsciously possessed by his feminine side, his anima, he becomes withdrawn, moody and reactive. And when a woman is possessed by her male side, the animus, she becomes aggressive and dominating. And how many women are pushed into that by the nature of the modern workplace. The Cathy Newman I know is warm, compassionate, a successful and talented journalist. None of this is criticism of her, just the role she was playing in the interview.
I would say technically, and might be interesting for people who are interested in Jungian psychology, if you want to understand what Carl Jung meant by animus possession, which is a very difficult concept, then that interview was a textbook case of having a discussion with someone who is animus possessed. Life has been moving forward for 3.5 billion years, and it moves forward in these patterned manners, like the dominance hierarchy, for example. So let's call that the masculine archetype. It's part of the masculine archetype. In fact, Jung's proclamation was that the female representation of the male, so that's the animus, is the dominance hierarchy. It's the patriarchy. So that's the unconscious archetype, which I think is extremely interesting given what's happened, say, in the women's movement, because that's what's projected onto men. And it can be projected in a very negative way. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And so an animus-possessed woman treats a man as if he's the manifestation of the tyrannical patriarchy. He's a group. He's the group of men. Yeah, the group of bad men, actually.
You watched the Jordan Peterson, Kathy Newman interview. What did you think?
Ooh, my whole body contracted, and I felt so sad for womanhood. I felt disappointed, and I could see how the shadow part of womanhood was acting out. I could see how the collective rage was acting through Kathy Newman. And this is what happens, is that when that's unowned, it's projected blindly onto wherever it sticks. And it was very clear that she already had an agenda, and she already had a projection that she was just looking to stick. She was just looking to have that confirmed. So I felt, on behalf of women, I felt sad and disappointed, because we need to have intelligent conversations.
And I also want to say that this isn't, even though the specific example is the Kathy Newman Jordan Peterson interview, it's not specific to Kathy Newman. I think the fact that that interview has resonated with so many people, that it's been so popular, shows that actually something archetypal was going on in that interaction. Absolutely. And I think as well, why it's gone viral is a lot of people watching it recognize those dynamics. They're like, I've been in conversations like that. Yeah. I've been in this conversation where nothing I say works, where nothing I say gets through. Yeah. So there's something sort of fundamental about the masculine feminine dynamic that's going on in there. What do you think that is?
I think Jordan Peterson, he's every man. Kathy Newman, she's every woman. I can tap into that rage like this. I know it in myself. And women that say they don't, they're just denying it, because it is in the collective. So in that sense, it just highlighted what's there. It's wonderful, because here we really get to look at, why is this so important? Why is it so important to listen to a thinker like Jordan Peterson and take it seriously and say, what can we do with it? It's just so obvious that it's needed, because if this is where we are, if this is where society and culture is, if this is the ability to have an intelligent conversation, then we are in trouble. I really feel that there is this collective subconscious rage that is just boiling in women. And it's coming up in so many ways. We see in the media, and what's going on is this unowned rage that comes up in many different ways. And on one hand, it needs to come out. We need to clear it. It needs to be expressed. It needs to be acknowledged. On the other hand, it's not enough. This is breaking the ice, so that the next step of evolution can, consciousness can start coming through. And that's what I'm lacking in women. It's really to take responsibility for what we do as women, in our manipulation, in our seduction, in our control. And it's so easy for women to say, but that's just because we're angry and men did this and patriarchy. But it's such a lack of responsibility, and this women really need to know.
I mean, that's the kind of shadow work, is the acceptance that we all have shadows, that men certainly have a shadow. There is a shadow around masculinity, but there's also a shadow around femininity. And while part of the cultural conversation now is toxic masculinity, and everyone knows what you mean by toxic masculinity, if you talk about toxic femininity, everyone still knows what you mean, but you can't have that conversation, which is, it's interesting what is allowed to be said and what is not allowed to be said at the moment. And that I think is very dangerous, that certain topics, certain conversations are off limits.
Yeah. And this is where we see the victim persecutor dynamics activated, because women become the victims, and we make ourselves the victims, and we persecute men, but in that aggression, in that rage. And when we are the victims, we are in perfect control. We become the persecutors, because we say, it's all about blame. Men did this, and men need to take responsibility, but in that we become the persecutors.
And it's also very difficult as well, because one imagines that that combative attitude is something that has served her well in the past, and it's something that she's maybe felt forced into because of the nature of the society that she's operating in. So it's a kind of catch-22 situation for many successful women, because they feel that they're pushed to be more masculine.
Yeah.
And then when they're more masculine, they get judged for being more masculine.
It's very sad. And I can see that dynamics being played out, absolutely. But I think the only thing we can do is to take responsibility and say, okay, I'm doing that. Do I really want to compromise my femininity? Do I want to compromise my integrity? Do I want to compromise my gender and play that? Or is there another way that I can be powerful without being aggressive, without playing a power game, but resting in my natural power, resting in my natural dignity, resting in that deep rootedness that we both have in our genders, that when we are at peace with that and when we acknowledge it in ourselves, it's there as a natural thing. And this is the thing. I don't want to make this personal about Cathy Newman, because it's in that potential is in every woman, but it's because we are persecuting our own femininity. What's being played out, that we're doing it to ourselves because we don't trust that it's good enough to be a woman. We don't trust that we can have conversations that come from a felt, embodied perspective. We don't trust that we're connected to truth, because these masculine ways have been very strong, and women have been denying their own power.
La revolución necesita de tu ayuda. Deposita, suscríbete, comparte los videos, apórtanos en el Patreon para que podamos seguir luchando por la libertad.